The story I'm going to tell you about today serves as a reminder that you never truly know who you're talking to online. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, we decided to meet up in person. She invited me to this coffee shop. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Apparently, her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her. Then she told me that she was actually a guy. This guy claimed he really liked talking to me though, and basically begged me to still meet up with him. I was upset about being catfished and I declined, so I blocked his profile and continued on with life. About a week later, I decided to give the app another try and started talking to a different girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and I told her about my previous encounter with a fake profile. A few back and forths later, she asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure, as long as it was in a public place. We decided on a cafe, so the next day I sat at the table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed, and she was still nowhere to be found. Then I randomly looked out the window. From across the street, I saw a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike, and booked it home. When I got back to my place, I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together, reasoning that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile, and thankfully things returned to normal. Or so I thought. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first couple times, there's some guy breathing heavily into his phone. Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out. After about a day of these calls, I stopped picking up at all unless it displayed the caller's name. That's when I started receiving the text messages. At first they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging to meet me in person. When those went ignored, they rapidly changed to very sexual messages. When those got ignored, eventually the messages became very threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out my family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying he or she would get them involved unless I answered. But I had an idea. Because they were texting me, I could finally see a displayed number, so I got in contact with the phone provider. Unfortunately, they told me the number probably couldn't be traced and that it was a burner phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the messages, but eventually it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 to 20 new messages every single morning. At this point, I decided to change my number altogether, and I finally had peace again. The messages and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, they started happening again. I managed to ignore them yet again, and what else could I do? But one day, I tried logging into my Facebook and got denied. Within a day, my friends started contacting me asking me what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my friends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. Then I contacted Facebook, explained the situation, and they were able to help me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it. I had had enough. Now, I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on. They documented everything, but told me since I wasn't in immediate danger, they probably wouldn't even be able to do anything. That made me feel completely stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker, but I decided against it and just hoped it would fade. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional text as well, which weirded all of us out. I hate that they got dragged into it. One day, I came home, and things felt very eerie. Doors unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze was running through the entire apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. Thankfully, nothing else happened after that. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped, but I feel like this permanently affected my social life. Throughout this whole ordeal, work was very difficult. I tried to maintain my composure as best I could, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. I've stopped using all forms of dating apps and social media. Thankfully though, I finally feel like things are getting back to normal. I honestly just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first, Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and if you're using a dating app, please stay safe. This happened to a friend of mine. At the time, she was 18 years old. The story will be told from her point of view. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new and everyone at my university was on the app, so I joined to see what all of the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and this one guy in particular caught my eye. We'll call him Walter. I swiped right on Walter and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. Then he messaged me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We messaged on the app for maybe an hour and typical conversation was occurring. I asked him what he did for a living and he asked me what my major was. Harmless conversation. After some back and forth, he asked me for my number so we could text instead of message on the app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. Lots of flirty conversation and plans to hang out finally occurred. By the fourth day of conversation, he started calling me babe, which gave me mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We hadn't even met, we didn't know each other, so I ignored it and continued on with the conversation. But then, he made a comment about wanting to be exclusive, and he really wanted to see me in person. He was practically begging me at this point to come to his apartment to cuddle and watch movies with him and his dog. But I told him very firmly that our first meet needed to be in public. I would not be going over to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging, so I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day, he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans that weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just felt off, and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home to help her with some house chores. This annoyed him, and he responded by saying that my mom is a big girl, and that I should just come over and I could leave whenever to go help her, because he really wanted to see me and kiss me. I told him no, that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mom that day. After what he said about my mom, I just started ignoring him. And then the messages started rolling in. Text after text. Babe, I'm sorry. Please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you gonna come over? I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom, but then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and he just missed me and he wanted me to call him back. And similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. Later that night, my roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university's dorm. Suddenly, the calls from Walter started to increase again. More texts, voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. At this point, I wasn't planning on replying at all until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom. How did you know I was back in town?" And he said, "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course." Tinder doesn't tell exact locations, but it has a within 1 mile message. This really freaked me out. I messaged him back and said he was being really creepy. For him to have noticed my distance change like that, he had to be constantly refreshing my profile. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. According to him, he was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. Less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying,
"Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please forgive me."
oh hell no. I immediately called campus security and I told them about this guy, but they never found anyone waiting outside any of the doors. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. But after that, I blocked him on all socials, blocked his number, and deleted Tinder. I've never been back on since. I have seen him once out and about in the town, but he never recognized me, thankfully. Now, because of this one experience, because of this one creepy guy, I've second-guessed every single guy I find attractive. I was 21, I had just become a police officer, and was also newly single. That's when my friend told me about Tinder. So I made an account, and later that day, I matched with a very good-looking woman. In all honesty, I thought she was completely out of my league, but we chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and that we could meet up at her house. So the night came, I drove over to her house, and she seemed to be excited when I arrived. She guided me to the field, and it looked really nice. It had open space, deer, and other wildlife. In the field though, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance, but I put it out of mind. A few minutes later though, this van started driving towards us and eventually pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told my date to stay in the car and I'll go see what's up. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and walked up to the other vehicle. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what was going on and if he could back up his car a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife, and he was perfectly okay with that. Told me to have a nice date and drove away. When I get back to the car, this girl, my date, was texting nonstop. In general, she just seemed very preoccupied. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. I quickly hopped in the car and I moved it to a more defensible position. Then the same man came close enough to almost hit my car. My date hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. At this point, I finally understood what was going on. I got out of my car, gave them commands to back up and get on the ground, but neither of them complied. The man then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. Then I saw my date grab a metal pipe from their van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I refused. The woman I thought was my date started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. Her partner started to go back towards their car. At that point, I told them I was a cop and drew my concealed firearm to get them to lay on the ground. Fortunately, after a moment of shock, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number, and that I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. But while I was giving directions to the dispatcher the best I could, they both fled. My stupid new cop, young guy mentality kicked into overdrive, and I chased them. After running, they had separated a bit, so I took off running after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for about 30 seconds until I heard 3 loud pops. Then I saw the muzzle flash. Immediately, my I'm invincible mentality went right out of the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, as my luck had it, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. To give you an idea about the conversation we had, their most used words were idiot and dumb rookie. After weathering that verbal storm, I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they started getting shot at. So I waited as they cleared the area, and then started looking in the van. As they searched the car, they found meth right on the center console. What scared me the most by far, though, was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looking horrified. I made my way to the back of the van, where I saw duct tape, lighter fluid, handcuffs, and what looked like to be dried blood. In the passenger side front seat, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. They took blood samples and ran the plates, and the van came back stolen. Unfortunately though, after this, the case went cold. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. After that, I will never use online dating apps again. Ever.